All right, we're going to get into our next story here. If you have not heard, the Biden administration has decided to move forward with a project called the Willow Project. Now, this is not a good thing, especially for those of you who are climate activists and you care about climate change. This is something that Joe Biden has kind of prided himself in, and implementing climate reform, signing off on climate reform legislation. But as I told you a couple of months ago, he was still signing on to projects that was actually hurting the environment and would actually make the climate disaster worse. I talked about the drilling that he approved off the coast of Texas. And now we have this project in Alaska that he has signed on to, but it not only hurts the environment, it's not only an issue in reference to climate change, but it's also an issue in reference to Indigenous communities in that area. Shout out to Case Study QB here for this clip. This is when they were thinking about doing it. And then I'm going to show you some information that shows that he has approved this. This is really concerning.
In our Earth Matters series, the Biden administration is expected to make a decision soon on whether to approve a controversial oil drilling project in Alaska. And while there has been bipartisan support from the state's lawmakers and some Native groups for the Willow project, there is also a tremendous amount of pushback from climate activists in Alaska and beyond. Here's CNN's Renee Marsh.
At this point, the only way that this project can be stopped is if...
On TikTok and Instagram, calls for President Biden to stop Willow Project, an urgent call that's gone viral to block a controversial Alaska oil drilling project.
Please help stop Willow.
The videos racking up tens of millions of views, spurring more than 1 million letters to the White House and more than 3 million signatures to a Change.org petition.
In order to stop Willow, people need to know about Willow.
20-year-old Elise Joshi, a senior at the University of California, Berkeley, is one of the social media activists.
Will not just impact Alaska, it will not just impact this country, it'll impact the world. With the amount of carbon emissions that it will emit, we will see an increase in frequency and intensity of natural disasters.
ConocoPhillips' Willow Project would be located in northwest Alaska on the National Petroleum Reserve, federal land roughly the size of Indiana. The project would tap as much as 600 million barrels of oil.
This is why we need to move away from depending on oil. This is why. Now, you guys know, like, Alaska is kind of known for this. I mean, like, there are people I've known that have moved to Alaska to work in the oil industry. But we as a society, we have to find a way to move away from oil. And climate activists have been preaching about this for a long time. So have climate scientists as well. But here we are again. Now, Joe Biden signed on to climate legislation, which was a part of that Inflation Reduction Act, which really wasn't about inflation at all. But he signed on to that. But signing on to particular legislation to help try to fight climate change doesn't mean anything if at the same time you are signing on to projects that are deeply, deeply hurting the environment. It's a wash, basically. And I've said this before, even that climate legislation that was passed, that does not go far enough. I've had this conversation multiple times with people, and they'll agree to that. And to go along with that, you have him trying to drill in Alaska, also on the coast of Texas, all for the need for oil. Let's go on.
But it would take years for it to make it to market. It's messy politics for President Biden, pitting his climate promises against the desire to produce energy at home and lower gas prices. The project would release as much planet-warming carbon emissions per year as adding 2 million gas-powered cars to the road annually.
You see this? 2 million cars to the road annually. That's how much that would emit into the air. I'm at this point where I would just want to say, screw cars, just screw it all. Like, get me a flying scooter. Give me something like that. I don't know. Someone invent this somewhere, a flying scooter where I can just hop on my little scooter. I can press a button just like George Jetson, right? Remember the Jetsons? I can just press that little button, go up into the air and fly on that scooter wherever I need to go. Someone, let's bring us something like that. I'm so done with cars. And this is why people need to understand, even if people tell you, like people just said this, well, to help the environment, just buy an electric vehicle. That's not enough. And also, not everyone can afford to buy another car. Not everyone can afford to buy an electric vehicle either. That's nothing when you have people drilling in Alaska for oil. That's nothing when you have people drilling off the coast of Texas. That's nothing when you have the military-industrial complex still fighting these wars. None of that is going to curb it. So we got to fight here. You got to fight for your future. You got to fight for your children's future. You got to fight for your grandchildren, your future, your children's future, your grandchildren's future. It's all going to be affected by this. Like, this is not okay. You see, Joe Biden's like, what, 80 something years old? He's not going to be affected. That's the problem.
That's according to a government estimate.
Loss of taste and smell, dizziness.
Sikanik Maupin's family lives near the proposed site, and she recently traveled to Washington to protest outside the White House against the Willow project, despite its economic benefits.
We've been held in an economic hostage situation. We either choose our health, our children's health, our ways of life, or being able to have plumbing and infrastructure and running water.
Nagruk Hasharik's family has also lived in the region for generations. He supports the project. His nonprofit represents 24 Native communities, corporations, and local governments who say the project would be an economic boon and help the U.S. wean off of foreign oil.
Joe Biden has chosen profits over climate and over community. So the talks that he gives about, yes, we have to invest in the African-American community. We have to fight for the soul of this country. It's a lot of virtue signaling, but the actions say the exact opposite. Because if you really do care about Indigenous people, you wouldn't be trying to drill oil on their land and hurt their community. You wouldn't do that. This is all about profit.
The economics that a project like this would bring into the region, mainly to the North Slope borough in the form of taxes to help provide and maintain first world conditions.
Meantime, the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than anywhere else on the planet due to climate change.
We cannot keep drilling for new fossil fuels if we want to address climate change.
Nope.
Well, ConocoPhillips tells CNN in a statement that this project will create, quote, good union jobs, and the project has undergone a comprehensive regulatory process for nearly 5 years with extensive public input. And Erica, we could see that decision come from the Biden administration as soon as next week.
And it did happen. So here's the thing, creating good union jobs. I'm all for union jobs. I'm all for that. But there are other ways that you can create those jobs without destroying the environment, without destroying people's communities. Are these the jobs that Joe Biden's been talking about? We created all these jobs. These the jobs? What good are those union jobs if you don't have a community to live in? What good are those jobs if you're going to be underwater? Do you see the line of thinking? This is just all about short-term profits. It's all about greed, corporate greed. And this is why we say that they're corrupt, because they are willing to throw, I want to be really clear about this, you guys. They are willing to throw our future away so that they can make a short buck. All of us should be livid about this. There should be thousands and thousands of people protesting right now because of this situation. How many times are they going to continue to screw younger people over? This is our future. First, it was the student loan debt. He messed that up. Then it was, we're going to codify Roe v. Wade. Not happening. Then it was, I passed climate legislation and he's doing this behind your back. How many times are we going to let them just sit here and destroy our future? A lot of us already can't buy homes, can't buy cars, can't start a family. This is not acceptable. And this is one of those issues, and I have to be very clear. This is one of those issues where you're going to have to get past. You're really going to have to get past this whole purity test. You have to do this. Because this is an issue where you can't just say, I'm only going to align with these groups of people that do this kind of thing. This is something that is going to affect every single one of us. So they just told you the Arctic is warming faster. This is not good. Do you see why I get upset sometimes about the purity test? Now, CNN released this article here. It was approved. Biden administration approves controversial Willow oil project in Alaska. Now it's galvanized online activism. And here's the young woman here that you saw in the previous video clip. She is one of the activists that are in that area. And it says here, the Willow project is a decades-long oil drilling venture in the National Petroleum Reserve, which is owned by the federal government. The area where the project is planned holds up to 600 million barrels of oil, though that oil would take years to reach the market since the project has yet to be constructed. By the administration's own estimates, the project would generate enough oil to release 9.2 million metric tons of planet-warming carbon pollution. Highlight this piece here. Planet-warming carbon pollution. A year equivalent to adding 2 million gas-powered cars to the roads. This is terrible. Listen to this statement here from Lisa Murkowski. We finally did it. Willow is finally reapproved. And we can almost literally feel Alaska's future brightening because of it. Now, she's a Republican, so here you have Joe Biden siding along with Republicans. So we have bipartisan support to destroy the planet. How is Alaska's future going to be brighter if people are underwater? All these emissions into the air. Now, one of the activists, believe it's the same activist, she was on Democracy Now! And I want you to hear her interview here. And the name of this video is called Climate and Indigenous Activists Decry Reports Biden Will Approve Willow Oil Drilling Arctic Project. So when you guys hear them, I'm going to be very clear. When you hear them make these statements that, oh, we signed sleeping climate legislation, you need to push back on that.
Organizations are reporting the Biden administration's preparing to formally approve a massive oil and gas development in northern Alaska known as the Willow Project. Approval of the $8 billion ConocoPhillips development is expected to be announced today, greenlighting the drilling of some 600 million barrels of crude oil. Climate activists and many indigenous groups had urged Biden to reject the project, warning it'll create a carbon bomb. In advance of approving the Willow Project, the Biden administration also announced on Sunday steps to reduce oil drilling in other parts of the Arctic. This includes barring future oil and gas leasing for 3 million acres of federal waters in the Arctic Ocean and limiting drilling in a further 13 million acres in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska's North Slope. Kristen Mansell of the Center for Biological Diversity criticized the Biden plan, saying, quote, protecting one area of the Arctic so you can destroy another doesn't make sense, and it won't help the people and wildlife who will be upended by the Willow Project, they said. We go now to North Pole, Alaska, where we're joined by Sikanik Malpan, Executive Director of the Sovereign Inupiat for a Living Arctic. It's great to have you back. Thanks so much for joining us, Sikanik. Can you talk about what you understand is being announced today?
Well, recently on Friday afternoon, the Bloomberg report came out saying that there were speculations that the Biden administration will approve a 3-pad plan instead of the 5-pad original plan. And now we're hearing that he will make his decision Monday at about 9 a.m., but we're not for sure.
Yeah, so the decision was already made.
While campaigning in 2020, then presidential candidate Joe Biden said, quote, "No more drilling on federal lands, period." This is candidate Biden responding to a question about his position on drilling in the Arctic.
Watch this.
Yes, he made
And
a
I
lot
think
of...
I'm the only one, maybe not the only one running who's been up in the Arctic Circle. Remember the great oil spill that occurred? And I watched when I went up there, and I went up in a helicopter up on the North Slope and saw what was going on and saw what was happening as the glaciers began to melt and how the caribou and everyone, I mean, there's a lot going on up there. And it's a real gigantic problem. And by the way, no more drilling on federal lands, period, 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 period.
Do you see why you can't trust the politics? You see why you can't trust them? That was his statement. No more drilling on federal land. And here we are. He hasn't even finished a full term. Couldn't wait to drill. Couldn't wait.
Well, the Arctic Circle is a disaster to do that.
So that was candidate Biden. And again, the little part we missed at the beginning of what the candidate said was, I'm completely, totally opposed to drilling in the Arctic. Sikanik Malpan, describe this project. What is the Willow project and what you understand President Biden's announcing today?
Well, this is the biggest oil and gas leasing project that's on public lands right now. It is a massive project that would be happening in the North Slope. Closest community would be Milksit, and this would completely encircle the community in oil and gas, which already has Prudhoe Bay, Alpine, and this is just the start of the project because this could green light for further exploration, further development, and this project would emit so much carbon, it would actually double the amount that Biden had promised that he would reduce. And so all of his plans to reduce the CO2 being released would be nullified by this project and then putting back double what he said he was going to reduce.
And this would also cause health problems as well, because who's going to be breathing in that air? They are, the indigenous people. How many times is our government going to allow for indigenous land to be corrupted, to be destroyed? How many pipelines they're going to put through? There was this whole push to stop Line 3. Remember this? We talked about this last year. Stop Line 3. You had the pipelines there. You had like the pipelines going through Flint, the dirty water in Flint. These are working class and poor communities of people of color. So you have the indigenous communities that have constantly been affected. Let's go back to Standing Rock. Let's remember that as well. And you have Black communities that are constantly affected. They don't care because they see these groups as disposable. And that's what this really comes down to, guys. You would never see them try to do this in Beverly Hills. You don't see them trying to put pipelines through wealthy white neighborhoods. It does not happen. They attack the poor, they attack those that are vulnerable, and they attack the working class. And those are usually communities of color. This is a big problem. You see the same thing happening in the Appalachian Mountains, where a lot of poor and working class people live. The same thing. This is where they funnel it. And this is how you end up with environmental pollution in those areas. They don't care if they give you the dirty water. They don't care if your air is polluted because they see those groups as disposable. And that's what people really have to understand. You can go across the street in Boston. If you stand on one side of the street, you're in Roxbury at the intersection of Mass Ave. If you stand on the other side of the street, you're on the South End. If you leave the South End and you walk across the street to Roxbury, your life expectancy drops by 30 years for the people who live on that side. And part of that has to do with the environmental pollution. How many more indigenous groups we have to see on media, whether it's Standing Rock, whether it's this Willow Project group, whether it's Stopping Line 3. How many more? We've interviewed some of them. We've interviewed water protectors on RBN. We had a whole summit where we brought on different groups and we interviewed, at least I did that interview, the water protector group, where they came on, they were Indigenous, and they came on, they talked about what's happening to their water in their communities. So these politicians, like I said before, those going through that two-party system, they just virtue signal to these groups. And at the same time, they are slowly destroying their communities.
And can you talk about why you've invested so much time and energy into protesting this and the two parts of the plan that's being announced today?
Because it's her community,
yes,
Amy.
I want to say personally, I've been trying to fight this project for about 4 years. And on a more personal level, my mother lives in Nuqsat. My family is from Nuqsat. And although I wasn't raised there, I have a deep connection and love for the community. And in 2018, I was invited to go to an air quality monitoring system planning session. And currently, ConocoPhillips owns the only air quality monitoring system in place in Nuqsat. And they also own most of the research that is quoted for the safety of this project to go forward. So we went over the top 10 pollutants that are put out by ConocoPhillips that's required to be put to the EPA and what the possible impact is from being exposed to those pollutants like cancer, respiratory illness, and other things, even changing the sex in the womb of a child from male to female. And in that session, there was community members, the youth council, and a lot of us realized that we had seen these occurrences in our family. We had seen increase in cancer, respiratory illnesses. And in 2012, there was a blowout, a Repsol blowout, and that caused one child to be medevaced from the village, another one to have permanent health problems with their respiratory system. And many people have complained recently there was a gas leak near Nuqsat in the Alpine field. And they didn't evacuate the village. They said that they were fine, but many people self-evacuated because children were complaining of nausea, headaches, and not feeling well. And so currently there is no plan put into place to help evacuate or keep the community of Nuqsat safe. And as I learned more about this project and its impacts, not just to the community and the public health, but the climate impacts were significant. The Arctic is warming at 4 times the rate than the rest of the world. And while many people speculate climate change, we're living it. We're seeing in the Yukon River, they haven't been able to fish for many years, subsistence fishing. We are seeing caribou that are showing signs of starvation. We're seeing fish pop up with mold. And this project is going to accelerate those issues and create food insecurity and many, many issues that is not just going to affect Nuqsat or the 8 communities in the North Slope, but the entire Arctic itself. And then, of course, globally, it's going to affect people for climate change. And so this project, we're concerned about for those reasons, but we also want to transition away from oil and gas. And this would lock us into oil and gas for the next 30 years. And so, and we wouldn't actually see any of the benefits economically for 10 years. So this would be something that, you know, a catastrophe for Biden, who had promised that he would transition us into clean energy. And what is also concerning is that systematically, we've seen that small rural places like this, time and time again, coal, gold mining, have been in an economic hostage situation where they're told that the only way that they can get basic necessities like running water and plumbing and such is to sacrifice their health, their lands, their food security, and so many more consequences from this project.
Okay, so something she said there that I think is incredibly important. Remember, I mentioned the health issues, right? So again, increase in cancer, respiratory illnesses that you have there. She already told you that they're starting to see like the fishing industry is being affected by these pollutants. So these individuals that live in those communities, again, they're more likely to have more health problems. You can see this also in places like Flint, Michigan, Jackson, Mississippi. You can see it in places like Baltimore, Maryland. If you go into a lot of these inner city neighborhoods where I told you, like Roxbury here in Boston as well, is that they do have increased rates of asthma. They have increased rates of respiratory illnesses and cancer as well because of the environmental pollution. So again, like I said, there's a big issue here. It's not just about the climate as well. It also affects the health of the people that live in those communities. Now, the Sunrise Movement, they saw this and they didn't like it, of course, and rightfully so. They actually tweeted about this. President Biden officially approved the Willow project. Instead of sticking to his own climate goals and listening to the millions of young people who carried the party for the last 3 election cycles, POTUS is letting the fossil fuel industry have their way. But see, I to Sunrise Movement, I just have to say, I'm not sure what you expected to come from Joe Biden. Even when people were applauding him for that recent climate legislation, part of that legislation was to give some type of something to Joe Manchin here, where Joe Manchin still wanted to allow these fossil fuel companies to be able to have private land. So there was always something in it for the fossil fuel companies. And this is what I was trying to tell people back then. I was told I was being pessimistic. I was just giving you the facts. And sometimes the facts may not be what you want to hear, but you need to know the truth. They rarely pass legislation that does not have some type of corporate interest attached. And that is important for people to fully understand. So I'm sorry to the Sunrise Movement that you seem to be surprised about this, but we knew exactly who Joe Biden was before he became president. Now, there is something that you can do. There is a petition that you can sign to stop the Willow project. Right now, they're almost at that goal. They have over 3 million that have signed. So they're almost there. But I highly recommend that you guys sign this petition. They really want to get to that goal. And this is through change.org. And I know sometimes people feel that petitions don't really do anything, but I would still sign it, you guys. I would still sign it. Like, this is a serious issue. And I really do wish there was a massive protest for this. I really do.